I'm going to start.
And we are approaching time. I will wait one more minute beyond. I'll try to start us about 12:01. All right, let's go ahead and begin the meeting. Kind of a thunk. If you would, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing just for a moment for our moment of silence. Two items to bring before you. First, a moment of loss. On November 17th, Sandy Horton passed away. Sandy is the bride of Dick Horton, who had been a member of the club for, I think, 40 years. So please keep the Horton family in your memory. And Karen had shared some information about the details for visitation in the memorial service. Also, in this case, we have a moment of celebration as well to share. And that is Rocco Carper joined us. Kelsey gave birth on November 15th to Rocco. So we want to give congratulations to the Carper family as well. So a moment of loss and a moment of celebration. So let's just take a minute and think of both of these individuals and their lives and their families. Thank you. You may be seated if you're standing, and we'll look forward to hearing our welcome song. And John will share as he usually does. Thank you, John.
You bet. Thanks, Kent. To all our guests and visitors, welcome to you from Ames Rotary, Naveda, London, or Gay Paris, from far off lands or the USA. We're glad that you are here today. Come back again whenever you're near. Join us and then we'll make it clear. Around the world you will always be. Welcome at Rotary.
Cha-ching. Thank you, John. And thank you all for attending and for any guests that we might have on board with us this afternoon. Glenn, let me go ahead and share, if you would, announce a little bit about the Water Partners meeting.
Yes, coming up on November 29th at 10 a.m. will be our annual Water Partners meeting. This year, we're going to have a live option. We've been doing it Zoom for the last couple of years. The live option will be held at the Fox Engineering Conference Room. So for those of you that have the time and want to come and see what we're up to, that's where we'll be. We have asked other people to partake, as far as our partners in SAME will be online, and they have a short presentation, and we'll also be taking questions along with us. And we do have a report coming in, hopefully before then, the conclusion of Mahezi 2, along with the cadre report that should be coming with that. So we've got some good things going, and then we'll go on and talk about our future, what we got going for this next go round of Manamu and Voudet, two villages at once. So you're all welcome. Hope to see you there.
Thank you, Glenn. Appreciate that. And as we imagine Rotary this year, I'm sitting here thinking on that date, that Tuesday, we will literally be broadcasting worldwide. We'll have our partnership in Africa and other clubs from around the country joining in. It's just an incredible event and opportunity to see the power of Rotary. So thank you, folks, for your work on that, and any people that would like to attend, we would encourage your participation on that.
Well, along with that, Kent, there's Rotarians from 4 countries that are invited. So
yeah, just amazing, just an encouragement. Also, as an encouragement, next Monday, we have the opportunity to welcome heroes of the community. And I think it's going to be an incredibly special event. It will be live. It will be at the Alumni Center. So if you're able to participate and join us for lunch, I would like to encourage you to do so. We have 15 individuals from the community that will be recognized and presented with Paul Harris recognition. So we want to make sure that you're available and can be there if at all possible. Also, just a quick update on a couple of events that are occurring within the club. We are making site visits to other venues. We're trying to keep everyone, at least in the board level, apprised of the visits that we have scheduled. So we want the club to know that we have those going on. No determinations obviously have been made at this point, but time is running out for us. We have 6 weeks to find a new location. Also, we made several of us made a run over to Marshalltown to visit their evening club. And that was just a real wonderful experience to see how they're operating the extension of their noon club into their evening. And we will share more as we know more as our evening club continues to evolve. And one other item I just want to update you just very briefly, and that's on the survey results that we have received. One of the questions was asked, will those survey results be shared? And the answer obviously is yes. I'll work with Mason. We'll get a time put together, and we'll get a PowerPoint presentation, whether it's during one of the live sessions we hold or during one of our Zoom sessions. We will be sharing, and I think it would be a worthwhile meeting to do just for the survey. And so you can see what results we heard about and some guidance on where we may want to do and what we may want to do or need to do for the future. So those are just the quick announcements that I would have regarding club activities. Now, the really important stuff, this day in history. Here we are just a couple days before the celebration of Thanksgiving. And on this day in 1620, prior to landing at Plymouth Rock, the Mayflower Compact was signed. And that was an agreement to abide by the laws that the new government that the passengers would establish. So 41 men signed that compact on this date in 1620. And for all of our ISU aeronautics engineers, on this date in 1781, the age of flight began. 241 years ago today, the first crewed hot air balloon flight was made near Paris. So I thought that was kind of a fun one. And as we get ready for Thanksgiving, today is National Stuffing Day. So those of you getting prepared for Thanksgiving, you might want to get your stuffing ready. Today's that day. And also today is National Gingerbread Cookie Day. So grab your rolling pin and your cooking cutters. And folks, let's get those gingerbread cookies made today. By the way, this is a prelude to National Gingerbread House Day, which is December 12th. So I just want to set your expectations. Now, with the fun stuff over, the real excitement begins. Mr. Adams, if you would take the opportunity, Mason, to introduce our special guest today, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Kent. Well, I'm excited for the opportunity to hear from our special guest today. Adam Thoms, who's with us, is an associate professor of commercial turfgrass in the Department of Horticulture at Iowa State University. He is the Turfgrass Extension Specialist, helping athletic fields, golf courses, and professional lawn care companies with issues they run into during the year. So obviously that means he's a very busy man. And while also conducting research on turfgrass management and teaches classes on sports turf management and turfgrass irrigation. Adam is a native to Iowa, grew up in Waverly, attended Iowa State for his undergrad, and received both his Masters and Ph.D. from the University of Tennessee. And I wanted to invite Adam to speak to our club. A lot of us either in person or maybe watching in our living room on Saturdays in the fall, watch Iowa State run onto the field and play football. And while they may not be having as much success on the gridiron, so to speak, they're playing on probably one of the best surfaces, natural grass surfaces in the entire country. And something for all of us to be really proud of the homegrown talent we have here, and the homegrown turf, which is an article recently that inspired me to reach out to Adam. And so we look forward to hearing more about how much work it takes behind the scenes. And Adam, specifically, I'm interested when you have a week like we had, with all that prep time of painting and stuff like that, when you have snow and ice and everything else, how much more difficult that really is to make it look spectacular on Saturday evenings in the fall. So Adam, welcome to the club, and look forward to hearing from you.
All right, thanks, Mason. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you guys. I'll go ahead and get my screen sharing. I've done a short presentation here for you, and I'll leave it open to plenty of questions. So a little bit about me specifically is that I'm kind of filling in for Josh Traverdick, who is the grounds manager for the playing surfaces. I work closely with Josh. He does a lot of the day-to-day operations, and I help him with issues, things like that. But I'm more than willing to answer any questions about that surface. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with the presentation talking about what we did to grow the sod that actually became the playing surface at Jack Trice. And then we'll take some questions on game field prep, things like that. So just briefly here, a little bit of a background. I know not everybody's probably an Iowa State fan in the club, or maybe knows the history, but obviously Jack Trice Stadium was built originally in the 70s with that hard AstroTurf type surface. Kind of that nasty carpet over asphalt with a little bit of padding. Hard on knees, things like that. The athletic department in 1996 made the decision to start to feel the need for a safer playing surface. And on the research side, athletic field maintenance had come a long way, and the understanding of how to maintain a surface. So, it's not the old native soil surfaces that used to turn to mud in inclement weather. Now it was a sand-based system. And so basically what they did, and I'll show a picture later, was they created a sand-based root zone that was 12 inches of a specific size sand that locks together with a little bit of organic matter to hold some moisture over small gravel and then drainage tile. So this would allow water to drain during inclement weather so that it wouldn't turn into a mud bowl, but would still hold enough water for a plant to grow. And so that was a big deal. Now, the tough part about that, or the problem with that, is the fact that you can't just get normal sod like you would get for your house, because that would be a native soil, which is a finer size particle. And so the finer size soil particles over top of a larger size means that those are going to always stay wet on the surface, and it's going to become problematic for the athletes. So you have to really get a sand that matches that lower surface. And so that was part of the initial issue that they had. When they put this field in 96, no one was growing sod like that. They found a sod up in Wisconsin that was a 84% sand-based soil. And so they found that that was close enough, and they used it. And it worked fairly well. It had a few issues throughout the years, but it did okay. And just some highlights from that old newspaper articles that I found on this story. One of the things is that they worked very closely, the athletic department, Department of Horticulture, together on selection of varieties and the sod farm, as well as specifications for sand, and trying to give the best construction possible. And so I think this background information and the close partnership that the athletic department and Department of Horticulture had really pays off for the success of this field today. And that's, it was built properly, it was built right, and a lot of good thoughts were put into it so that we don't see the issues that we see on some of the other stadiums that maybe don't necessarily work real well. So that 1996 field lasted 12 football seasons. In 2007, they began to notice that they had a thatch layer that was starting to build up. One of the things with natural grass growing over sand is you constantly have to aerify it or poke holes, remove those cores, and then put fresh sand in to continue to keep good drainage on that surface. Along with that field was a invasive plant called annual bluegrass, or Poa annua. And this is a bluegrass species that's annual lived. It's very problematic for football fields because it germinates in late September, early October, grows throughout the summer, sets seed in July, and dies about the 1st of August. So you can imagine if you had a lot of annual bluegrass that started to take over a football field, it looks great in July, and then you have a dead field come August, September, when you need it the most. And so this was starting to move in, and what happens is the annual bluegrass comes in on players' cleats, and then they play the game, and an area thins out on the field. This annual bluegrass seed gets dropped off there, and then it starts to germinate and fill in those spots, and it outcompetes. And so that's where you get these spots where you can have problems on the field. So they decided to replace the field for the 2008 season at that point. Again, they got the sod from that sandy root zone up in Wisconsin, and they just basically cut out the old sod and put the new sod down. They continued to top dress and aerify and add new sand to the existing field. And what happened was, over time, was they took that 12 inches of sand and they actually built up to around 18 to 20 inches of sand over the gravel. And so here's a kind of a picture of, what the root zone looks like down at Jack Trice. Very similar to those of you that golf and see sand-based root zones. Very similar to that same construction methods. So they had 18 to 20 inches of sand over this drainage tile and gravel. And what happened then was it actually was draining too quickly. So the field was draining so fast that they couldn't get the water in there for the plant to grow, and they were having to water more frequently. This turns into the plant doesn't have to run its roots as deep, so it's not as strong of a turf. And so that becomes problematic there. Plus, they're using more water than what they'd like to. And so the athletic department then was charged with making the decision of, okay, it's time to put in a new surface. What should we do? They looked around at the data, and what they saw was that synthetic turf to this day still has a higher injury rate than what natural grass does. So they felt like a natural grass field was safer for the athletes. It's also safer for the environment. Well, there's definitely inputs that go into natural turf, especially this high maintenance natural turf. At the end of the day, it's not being torn out and put in a landfill to lay there for 1,000 years while it slowly breaks down. And so, you know, we could take, when we tore out the last playing surface, it went to the compost pile, and now is a part of soil throughout campus that they've used to fill in some of the spots on the field where the students have walked across campus. So, you know, it can be recycled that way. So I went down and met with the athletic field manager at the time, Tim Van Loo, and Tim said, hey, we need to replace the playing surface. We're having to water more often than we want. And so can we look at some different sites, some sod specs that are out there to maybe replace that field? And so that was the discussion that was had. We kind of found one. The closest one was out in Colorado that mostly met our specifications, but again, it wasn't a guarantee that it was going to work. And so that was kind of a concern to both of us. You don't want to go through this effort and not have something that works. So I walked out of the stadium that day kind of thinking about it. I called Tim back and said, hey, what if we just grew this ourselves as part of our research facilities? And he was like, that's what I was hoping for an answer. So that was what we jumped into, and that was the process that led us down the path that we had. So what we did was we found a student up here in the corner here. This is Thomas Gould, and Thomas is getting his master's now in horticulture, specifically turfgrass, and he was crazy enough to agree to help us, you know, do all the science and the math and grow this thing in. And so I'll show some of the interesting aspects of the grow in that Tom got to be a part of. And then we found a site, and it was an old cornfield at the Horticulture Research Station up by Gilbert. And so we plowed the corn stalks under, and here's a picture of that in the spring of 2021. And then we kind of leveled the surface, kind of packed that soil down, because we knew we were going to spread sand over the top of it so that it would match. So we leveled the surface. The really nice part about 2021, as you remember back, was it was a very dry spring. And so we were able to make amazingly quick work of this project. We had 0 rain delays. And so that really worked in our favor. So, well, it maybe didn't necessarily work for your home yards or the farmers. It really worked well for us to try to get this project up and going. So after we established the site, athletics came back to us and said, hey, let's change out the practice fields at the same time as Jack Trice. So we knew at that point that, one, our project had doubled in size, but also that we had no other backup plan at this point. So in other words, they were taking out the practice field and the game field. So it wasn't like if the sod didn't grow in and they tore out the game field, we could just steal the practice field and put it over there. So we knew we had to be successful at this point. And so we brought in sand from the same sand mine that initially created or was used for the creation of Jack Trice. So we knew that sand would match perfectly, so we'd have no layering issues and water would move freely throughout the system. And so to cover our 6 acres with 3 inches of sand, it was about 110 dump truck loads of sand that were brought in to spread out over this site. And then we installed irrigation in the site so that we could make sure we had uniform moisture throughout the grow in. And we knew we had about a year to turn this around. The next thing we did was we do a lot of testing of turfgrass varieties. So much like the farmers do corn variety testing, we're testing turfgrass at our research facility. And we're looking at things, you know, how do they do cold tolerance, various disease tolerance, traffic tolerance, things like that. We actually have a machine that goes out and simulates football games or foot traffic. So you can actually look at that and see how it does under traffic. And so we picked 3 cultivars that did really well under traffic. And they also gave a deep green color genetically so that when you walk into the stadium, you see that deep green color without us having to over fertilize. So people always ask, what are the varieties? It's Legend, Blue Note, and Bolt. And the reason we picked Bolt was it's a very fast germinating Kentucky bluegrass. So we knew we were in an open scenario where we had a lot of sand out in the open. And so we knew that we'd be susceptible to wind damage, things like that. And so we wanted to make sure that we'd have something that would come up quickly and the ground would be held with something that come up and germinate. So those were our varieties there. One of the unique aspects about it here was the fact that we were growing the sod ourselves. So we could involve the students in our turf program and actually really get them to have hands-on opportunity to do this. And so that was a lot of fun to get to have them help us at different steps. So the first picture you see here are the students driving the sand pros, kind of circling them there. So what happens is they drive those across the sand and the tires create little dimples. And that creates a real nice seed bed so that basically the seed can fall down in that, water can sit in those little dimples, and then it improves the speed of germination. The other pictures there are many of our students out pushing fertilizer spreaders. So they walked back and forth 2 directions, spreading the bluegrass seed across all 6 acres there. So some of the students had Fitbits on that day, and I think they said they walked around 11 miles pushing those spreaders. So they got a good workout that day. They had a good time doing it. They talked, they joked around a little bit, but that was a really good practice session for them on practicing how to walk straight, make sure you get seed spread evenly, things like that. So we did all of that. At the same time, we put out a product to try to limit the amount of weeds, and that's mesotrione. One application of that, so that basically allows the bluegrass to germinate, but doesn't allow some of the weeds to germinate against it. And then we put out a starter fertilizer, which was a slow release. One of the big things that we always preach, and we try to practice what we preach, is we want to make sure that we have nutrients that are slow release so that they're not running off and polluting waterways. And so this is a very slow release. It was 180 days where it released the nutrients slowly over that amount of time. And then we turned on irrigation to run about a minute every 2 hours so that it would be just quickly to keep that seed moist and try to germinate. So we had the great plan in place. Things looked really good. The next day was April 30th, 2022. And it got unseasonably hot that day. So it was about 87 degrees. And we also had sustained winds of above 30 miles an hour for around 12 to 13 hours. So you can imagine a giant, basically beach sitting out there in the open, even though it was being irrigated regularly. What happened with that was basically most of our sand and seed were blowing around out there. So we had the best laid plans in place. And then Mother Nature threw us a curveball, and it felt like you were in the Sahara Desert where you were literally watching the sand blow around and all of our evenly spread seed blow around out there. And so that was a pretty big shot to the stomach at that point, where we weren't sure that we were going to be able to do this, just because the first day after we started this project, we're off to a terrible start. But we came back on Monday, we regraded about 3 of the acres, added a little bit of seed to some of the areas that had really blown away. And then we started to water and we continued to watch. And so we started to have germination across the site about 14 to 21 days later. And that's when we kind of started to feel good about the fact that, hey, we're seeing green. It's a very slow process. And then we literally watched grass grow over the next 6 months. So it was painful because it was the summer months. That's not when grass wants to grow. But we slowly filled in. We got more and more green. We felt like we were doing pretty good. So we got a drone out and we looked from the air to see areas that needed a little bit more irrigation or thin spots. And then we could send a student out with a hose to kind of hit those spots so that it would fill in a little quicker. We also had some weeds escape us. And so at this point, this is early August, we applied a product to try to knock those weeds out. And then we started on a foliar fertility program. So again, we were applying just the right amount of fertilizer that the plant could use for every 2 weeks. And we would do that foliarly or liquid application to the leaves. It was also time to start mowing. Because of the fact that we were growing on 100% sand, we couldn't bring out one of our traditional mowers that you would ride. And so 2 students, Tom and another graduate student, actually got to walk mow all 6 acres. And the mower had an 18-inch wide cut. So they went back and forth across that 6 acres. And there's the picture of their fitness program. They walked 15 miles that day in 4 hours and 11 minutes mowing that site. So they were supposed to do this twice. We bought a John Deere mower for the we repurposed the John Deere mower for the project. That was going to be a riding one. And after 2 mows, we figured it'd be stable enough for that. But that mower had a hydraulic line that went bad 2 minutes into the first run. And so we had to get a part. And that part took us another month. So they got to walk mow it, I believe, a total of 6 times before we finally got that mower up and running. So those guys were champs about it. They were very, they smiled about it. They kind of laughed and joked about it. But they always said they never had to go for a run that day after those. They definitely got their steps in. So that was a fun process for them. And again, once we hit late August, we started to really fill in density, started feeling good about our project. Here's a picture of Tom mowing one of those nice warm days right after the mower had broke and he was back to walk mowing it. And then there he is out hand watering spots, just the areas to fill in, add a little bit of moisture to thin spots. So this is what it looked like in September last year. We felt confident at this point we're growing a good sod. And then October, late October, right before we were getting ready to put it to bed, it striped up really good. And that was a good feeling to see at that point. You could start to see that dark green color, start to see a mowing pattern, which would give you something similar to what you would see on game day on the field. But also something that at that point we were confident, could hold up and we'd be able to harvest the next spring. So if you think about this last spring, we had a very cold, prolonged spring. They tore out the 6 to 8 inches across the Jack Trice. They tore out the sod at that point. And so it was open and ready to be moved. So April 27th, we came out, we looked at the site and we went, well, it looks a little brown, but it'll be all right. We'll just give it one final mow and move it. Hopefully nobody will notice that it's kind of still dormant, because the last thing we wanted to do was move dormant sod, because of course pictures would get out and they'd say, what are those guys doing over in the Turfgrass program? They're sending us dead sod. And so we mowed it the day of, and here's some pictures of that. So we did one final mow, it greened it up a lot. And then there's a picture of the sod cutter. Basically what happens is the sod runs in, these rolls drop down on it, rolls up on it, and then it gets spit out the backside. And so they're able to cut, it's 48 inches wide by 50 feet long is what a roll is. And so they were able to cut those and move those. They loaded them onto a semi. Of course, just like everything, great plans. Our original plan was we were going to cut 3 semis. The evening before, we would start and we'd stockpile those rolls of sod at Jack Trice, and then that way the crew down there could lay those 3 semis worth of sod while we cut sod the next day so they could get it all laid in one day. As they cut the first load to move down the night before, it started to rain and we got about 3/4 of an inch of rain. So they had to stop. So the next day we'd have to cut everything, which is fine. It worked out. It drained okay. But here's what it looked like. May 2nd, 2022 was the day we cut it. So that grass went from being seeded on April 30th, 2021 to being laid down on Jack Trice on May 2nd, 2022. So we were, a year and 2 days from seeding until being installed. And so there it was. We had a pretty big crew there. We knew we wanted to get it all installed in one day. And so we had a lot of turf students there, a lot of alumni. Iowa Sports Turf was the actual one that did a lot of the construction process, and it was a perfect day to do it. It was in the 50s, it was kind of drizzly, so there was no stress on the grass, and actually from the time it was cut to the time it was installed was about an hour flat, and so it really helped and paid off dividends there. One of the unique things, again, Jack Trice, because it's sand base, is after they would drive to lay it out there, they would have to sit there and turn around and regrade out any divots or things like that in the sand that were there, so that it was a perfectly level surface. And then they put a roller on it to make sure everything got rolled out just fine. So that was installation. It took us about 12 hours to go from start to finish that day, but we were able to get it installed and get it down and going. And so we aerified it on May 20th for the first time. It was rooting well enough that we could do that. And then you can see a picture here on May 17th. Here's the roots, and you can see that we brought it in, right there at that surface of the fingertips, and we're already down 3 inches at that point. And so it was really good there. The practice field got delayed a little bit, but got installed on July 2nd. And that was some construction efforts there that took a little longer, but there it was going down. August 8th, it was kind of a funny story there. We were excited and ready to see how it would play. And the coaches were hesitant to go out there. They didn't want to mess the field up. And so we were sitting there actually trying to promote, hey, coaches, it'd be great to get out there, get on it, try it out. Let's see how it looks, get a practice on it. So August 8th, they finally went out, tried it. They were happy with it. We were happy with how it played. And so that's how it went. I'll walk you through a little bit. Here it is, all painted up for the first game. Typically what happens on a game week is you'll notice that there's dark green and white or light green lines out there. And so starting on Monday of game week, they'll start mowing those patterns. And so basically how that's done is it's a rotary mower with basically a big cookie dough roller on the back of the mower decks. And so it lays the grass one way, and then as they go back the other way, it lays it the other way. And that's what gives it that dark green, light green pattern. And they'll mow it Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday, all in the same direction. And then that gives it that visual striping. Then on Thursday, they'll come in and they'll start to paint the white on the field. And they'll try to get all the white done on the field on Thursday, and they'll try to jump into the red as well. Now there's Josh and one other full-time assistant down there. And then the rest of the labor is our student workers from the horticulture program here. So the students get great hands-on experience. They have to paint just because of the time and things like that. On Wednesday, they'll come in and they will paint the yellow, or that'd be on Friday, sorry. Friday, they paint the yellow and finish up any other little odds and ends on the field. So the field's painted typically by Friday. Now this last week, what happened was on Tuesday and Wednesday, they shoveled the field off of snow. And how they did that was they had basically a giant blanket that they put out over the field on Sunday night to keep the snow so they could shovel it off. They shoveled the snow off the field those 2 days. They pulled the blanket off. They painted everything on Thursday all day. And so I think it took them around 14 hours to paint it that day. There was a crew of 10 students and 2 full-time staff members that did that. They turned around, they put the blanket right back on the field to try to protect it, try to keep the surface so it wouldn't freeze, so it wouldn't be too hard for the athletes. And then they played the game on it. So that's kind of how that goes. And that's that. Typically people ask, what about after the game? What do you do? Normally after the game, immediately after, they'll mow the field just to chop up any debris that's out there. And then they'll go and walk the field. And every 5 yards, somebody will take and they'll walk it and add seed and sand to any spots that might need it. They'll also take screwdrivers out and kind of push together any divots, things like that. And so that's one of the things. Towards the end of the season, they do a little bit less and less. After the last game, they won't do that. They'll just deal with it in the spring just because it's fine and it'll sit there. So with that, a little bit else here, we had a fun time with it. Got a lot of interesting requests for interviews, things like that. So we were kind of covering those. And that was kind of a fun project. We're not aware of any other university ever doing this where they grew their own sod. So that was kind of fun. And then we were crazy enough to partner up again with athletics, and they're taking out their artificial soccer field, and we're going to grow together a natural grass soccer field for our soccer team. So that's out by Towers. And so we started that July 23rd this year, and hopefully it'll be installed for this fall's competition. So with that, that's kind of a quick overview of the changeover, kind of what happens there. I'm more than open for questions at this point, I guess, if anyone has any.
Do you have any problem with the seams, with the big giant rolls that you roll out? How about the seams where you seam it next to each other? I would think you'd have a terrible time getting that to go together.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, when we talk about the seaming, we had enough time and enough lateral growth that when we pushed them together, we pushed it together very tight. And then we actually took a little bit of sand and just kind of ran down all the seams. So it knit together really nice. By that May 20th date, we couldn't see the seams anymore. And the varieties we chose are very aggressive for horizontal growth as well to knit together to avoid seams.
Wonderful.
And Adam, there in the chat line there too, you might see a few questions. I noticed there's one now.
Yep.
from-
Yep, that's a good question here. So heard that they'd recently stitched the field. That is true. So what happened was during the off week, we had the opportunity to actually basically stitch. So what they do is they took synthetic fibers and they basically sewed those down 8 inches into the ground. So it's kind of like reinforced concrete with rebar in there. And that would hold the sand together. The thought process here is college football is expanding rapidly. Conference games will go later. And so we need to start to think about that for the future. And so the thought process is if we could have the opportunity to reinforce it and have those stitches down in the surface or in the subsoil, that'll hold the field together better for those late games. So that's kind of what went on there. It's a very similar setup to what the Green Bay Packers have. Another question here, where is the seed sourced from? So that's Mountain View Seed is the company that actually put that together for us. It's the same seed as what's on the Field of Dreams. You could buy that from a distributor out of Des Moines called D&K Products. They sell it. Someone else asked, could one apply the same strategy to a home lawn initially regarding base and preparation? Yeah, you could do that for sure. I would suggest avoiding the sand just because you have to really stay on top of the moisture there. They go out and they check the moisture on Jack Trice every single day during the summer. And then they'll add just enough water that they need to just to make sure it's at those levels. So that's kind of why they keep at the, we always say, try to keep your natural soil in your yard. But, if you went out and kind of dimpled it and you seeded your yard, that would be a good process there.
At one time, the indoor practice field was an identical field to the Trice field. What do they do now?
Yeah, so the two practice fields outside are they're also stitched. They're identical to Jack Trice. It has the same makeup as far as that goes, and so they're still identical to that. They now run east and west instead of north and south, and that was a coaching decision. The coach wanted that for some of their activities, things like that. So.
But what's the surface on the indoor?
The indoor is a artificial turf, and it's actually probably due to come out. So that's one of the things that I should explain. A lot of people ask me, what about artificial turf? Why doesn't Iowa State go to that? One, it's athlete safety. It's a lot lower chance of, lower leg injuries on natural grass. But the other thing is natural grass lasts longer. So I use the example of the University of Iowa. They have an artificial turf surface. They've replaced their artificial turf surface 3 times in the amount of time that we've replaced ours twice. And so typically artificial turf will last anywhere from 6 to 8 years. We typically say that the natural grass surface should last 10 plus years. And so, we were at 12 and 14 years with the last 2 natural grass. I would expect this new surface to last 12 years as well, if not longer. As long as we're maintaining it correctly, which we should be. We won't change that.
I don't understand. How do you monitor the moisture daily?
Yep, good question. So we have what we call a TDR probe. And so what it is basically is it's a probe and it has basically it sends a bolt of electricity from one side to the other. Obviously electricity and water don't mix. And so if there's water, different levels of moisture in the soil, it will move that bolt of electricity quicker from one of the probes to the other, and it will tell us the soil moisture volume. And so then that can tell us exactly where we need to be soil moisture wise. And then we can turn on the irrigation to add more water. So this probe tells us how much soil moisture there is. Then we can calculate how much moisture we need to add through irrigation, or if we need to just shut it off for the day. So I hope that answered the question. Another
I
question
wanted
here.
to bring attention to this really nice article. I'm married to a farmer, Wallace's Farmer. Had a nice article there and then 2 full pages inside about the football field. How did you get those interviews set up?
Yeah, so actually a lot of those came, we're terrible at our own marketing, I guess you would say. And so a lot of those came from requests. Wallace Farmer reached out to us. They thought it'd be a fun story for people to read since we're part of the Ag College. And so that was kind of how that got started.
Great.
Yep. A couple more things in the chat. Someone asked if thatch is a problem in the long-term use. Could it be removed during mowing? Yeah, they can remove it. Typically we aerify the thatch out, but you could do what we call a vertical mowing or an aggressive raking. That's one way. Someone else asked, when ISU students have rushed the field after a big win, how has that impacted on field conditions? So every time people rush the field, a couple different things happen. Number one, the staff has to walk the field, and a lot of times on their hands and knees to pick up. It'd be amazing what falls out of people's pockets. And so it's everything from liquor bottles to glasses and things like that. Nails show up on the field during storming of the field. I don't know how people or why people are bringing nails into the stadium, but they show up on the field. And so literally they walk the field just about on their hands and knees, looking for anything that might hurt a player down the road. And then they'll come in and poke holes across the field to try to relieve some of that compaction from all those people being out there. And then finally, basically we mow the field and start again. And so that's kind of what can happen there. And that's the process after it. Typically with a storm rushing, you take what's a 2-hour job to fix the field and turn it into about a 5.5 to 6-hour job fixing the field after they've stormed the field. So another question is, there's been some discussion by the NFL to require all fields to be natural turf, an opportunity for more professionals in turf grass management. That's absolutely true. You know, the NFL's been monitoring this data and seeing that, you know, that players are getting hurt more often on synthetic surfaces. And so the players are demanding natural grass and try to prolong their careers and try to limit those injuries. And so we're hopeful that, you know, with time, we can get more professionals out there and go from there. So we do have, just for your own information, 3 of the NFL stadiums are managed by Iowa State grads. And so that's always exciting. And so, you know, we always hope that there's more and more to do in the future for them.
Environmentally, do you have to, if the University of Minnesota wanted to do something similar, they're going to have different growing conditions.
Yeah, so you know, it's funny that you say that. There is a couple of Midwest colleges that have reached out to us that have said, you know, like, hey, do you think you could grow this for us? And so we've kicked around some numbers, things like that. So who knows? Someday you might see Iowa State sod at a different Big Ten school. And so we'll see. But yeah, there's different environmental conditions at each school. And so they'd have to change their program around a little bit for each school for sure. Here's one. Do you believe the non-native or invasive plants coming into Jack Trice from the players' cleats or coaching staff shoes from other fields? Absolutely. That's true. That those weeds come in on players' cleats all the time or coaches' shoes. The example I use is Alabama played at Penn State a few years ago, and I was out there to look at Penn State's field, and they had a big patch of Bermuda grass because that's what Alabama plays on. And it traveled in on their shoes, and it started to move across their field. And so now they have a spot on their field. So does the University of Colorado's Buffalo romp on the field create unique problems for CU's field management team? That's a good question. Yes. You know, the buffalo running across the field, it's a firm enough surface that the buffalo doesn't create any imprints. but it very easily could if it got too wet. And so that's one of the issues that can happen. And so it's fun to talk to that crew actually about how they go out and they check the field to make sure it's firm enough for the buffalo to run so it doesn't cause damage when it shows up to run. Another question here, once the soccer project is complete, will you continue to grow grass at the Hort Farm? We'll continue to do our research out there for sure. As far as the sod farm goes, I'm not 100% sure what we'll do with that area, but we'll definitely do some research, continuing to learn more about how to grow athletic turf sod for sure. And the athletic department has talked about keeping some around the fort to use as well. Another question, does the marching band cause any problems for the grass? That's a good question. I will say that the marching band creates unique wear patterns on the field. The toughest thing for them is that they wear flat shoes and they march in the same spot for their game patterns. And so it does wear on the grass some. And so, on the game field for their single game event, if it's not rainy, it's not a problem, but their practice fields, where they practice over and over again, the same spots, it definitely wears, and it's tough in those spots for sure. And so the marching band does create some traffic issues there. Would you ever recommend the band to not perform on game day is another question. I'm not touching that one. So I wouldn't say that. People come to see that. It's part of college football. We know it's part of the wear and tear of the field. So
How about cost from start to finish, from the time you started growing it to the time you got it installed?
yeah, so I think we spent around $300,000, $350,000 to grow the field. And so that was cost to finish was, I think 350 was where we're at. I haven't done the final total on it to double check that. Just to give you an idea, people say, well, would it be cheaper to have put in synthetic turf? That's around $1.3 million to put in synthetic turf, knowing that in 6 to 8 years, you're going to have to replace that again at a cost of around $800,000 then too. So you can see where the price savings adds up being at natural grass. One other question here, could the sod farm eventually produce sod for commercial sales with net proceeds directed back to the Hort Turfgrass program? I'd love that because we could do more research and we could fund more students for graduate school. The problem is that, obviously we'd be competing against people that are in business, and as a state entity, we can't do that. So that's why it was unique that we could do it in state for ourselves, but that's about it. Good questions.
Do we have any more for Adam?
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. I appreciated it. I enjoyed the time today, and thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Well, per the usual, there's an old adage, wise saying, and it was created somewhere between 43 BC and 17 AD. So it's got some age to it. The philosopher was Ovid, and he indicated, we're going to update the terminology slightly. Grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. I don't think that's necessarily true, Adam, if you utilize the resources of the Iowa State Turf Program. Thank you for a phenomenal program and just incredibly interesting. Appreciate your time and work on this. We've been honored again.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Have a good meeting.
I also want to bring to note, and I appreciate this coming to our, Ann Campbell shared, and I apologize, I did miss this. Today is Norm Rudy's visitation from 4 to 6 o'clock at Grandin Funeral Home. So if you're able for Norm Rudy's visitation, that will be this afternoon. Well, with that, let us stand and recite the four-way test before we adjourn. The four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? You are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.